The war had lasted for 12 long years. The Cathari swarm, a relentless and ever-expanding force, had devoured entire star systems. What had once been thriving civilizations were now nothing more than lifeless husks, stripped of all resources, their people either slaughtered or taken for unknown purposes. The Galactic Coalition, a fragile alliance of species, had fought desperately, but the tide had never turned in their favor. Now, they were on the brink of annihilation. In the heart of the Coalition War Council, representatives of the last remaining free worlds gathered for what might be their final meeting. The air was heavy with defeat. Admiral Valar of the Zilnari stood at the center of the room, his elongated, silver-skinned frame rigid with frustration. He turned to the others, his voice sharp. "We are out of time. If we do not act now, there will be no coalition left to defend." Across the table, High Strategist Lurik of the Yalari, a species known for their tactical brilliance, shook his head. His many eyes flickered as he processed countless simulations. "We have exhausted every strategy, every maneuver. The swarm is adapting too quickly. Our fleets will not last another cycle." Silence fell over the chamber. They all knew the truth. The Cathari were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. Their bioengineered ships regenerated, evolved mid-battle, and adapted to every countermeasure thrown at them. Against such an enemy, no conventional force could survive. That left them with one final option. A desperate gamble. Valar exhaled, slowly, his voice a whisper. "There is one species we have yet to call upon." The room stiffened. Every being present knew who he meant. Humans. For centuries, humanity had remained distant from galactic affairs. They did not seek expansion, nor did they join alliances. Their technological capabilities were largely unknown, and those who had attempted to engage them found only polite refusal. No wars, no diplomacy, just silence. The Tarkin ambassador let out a hissing breath. "They will not answer." But Valar's gaze was unwavering. "We do not need them to answer. We need them to act." And so, for the first time in the history of the Galactic Coalition, they sent a distress call to Earth. A plea, a final hope. Days passed, then weeks. No response. The war continued, and the Coalition suffered loss after loss. Whole systems burned. Their fleets were reduced to scattered remnants, barely holding the line. Just as many had feared, humanity had ignored their call. And then, a single anomaly appeared on long-range sensors. Not a fleet, not an armada, just one ship. A massive unidentified vessel dropped out of FTL near the Coalition's central world, Alaris Prime. It was unlike any design they had ever seen. Sleek, black, featureless, as if carved from a single obsidian stone. No identifying markers, no known energy signature. It was as if the void itself had birthed a warship. The Coalition's battered fleet scrambled into defensive positions, unsure if this was friend or foe. Then, a transmission came through. A single voice. "Human. This is Commander Elias Graves of the UHS Aegis. We received your distress call. Stand by." Valar stared at the transmission, barely able to process it. One ship. They had sent only one. The Tarkin ambassador slammed a fist against the table. "Are they mocking us? Do they think this is a joke?" Lurik, despite his analytical mind, could only utter a single question. How could one ship possibly make a difference? They were about to find out. Alaris Prime had not seen calm skies in years. The once thriving capital of the Galactic Coalition had become a fortress world, its atmosphere thick with the haze of distant battles. Orbital defense stations hung in low orbit, their once pristine hulls now scarred by countless engagements against the Cathari swarm. The planet's surface, once covered in shimmering cities and lush landscapes, had been transformed into a hardened military stronghold, its people no longer citizens but survivors. Each day another battle against extinction. The War Council gathered in the main command chamber, its walls lined with holographic displays showing real-time fleet movements. They had expected a response from humanity, though they hadn't dared to hope. Now, staring at the deep space scans, they could only feel shock, confusion, and something dangerously close to betrayal. One ship. Admiral Valar's voice was eerily quiet, his silver-hued face unreadable. His elongated fingers tightened into a fist, though he did not strike the console before him. Not yet. The tactical readout displayed the vessel in perfect clarity, floating in the void like an obsidian monolith. No escorts, no fleet, no reinforcements, just a single warship, alone against the Cathari's swarming hordes. Perhaps there are more incoming, Lurik offered, his multifaceted eyes shifting rapidly as he processed calculations at inhuman speeds. Perhaps this is merely the vanguard. But as the seconds dragged into minutes, the answer became clear. This was it. This was humanity's response to their call for help. The Tarkin ambassador, a reptilian creature with a frame built for war, let out a sharp exhale. His scaled fists slammed against the war table with enough force to send a tremor through the chamber. Mockery. His voice was a growl, filled with deep resentment. They mock us. Do they think this is a game? A challenge? His fanged mouth twisted in disgust. They send one ship as if this is a mere test of strength, and when it falls, they will say they tried. Valar's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. We do not know that yet. His words settled over them, heavy and unwilling to be dismissed. They were warriors, leaders. None were so foolish as to discard even the slimmest chance of salvation. And yet, the doubt remained. How could one ship be enough? Then, the transmission came through. A single voice, firm and unwavering, filled the chamber. This is Commander Elias Graves of the UHS Aegis. We received your distress call. Stand by. Silence. The humans had spoken, and in just a handful of words, the room had changed. Valar leaned forward, eyes locked onto the ship's image. Aegis. The name meant little to him, but something about it stirred unease within his mind. The other commanders exchanged glances, some skeptical, some irritated, some unwilling to believe that this was anything but a mistake. The Tarkin ambassador scoffed. Stand by? For what? The destruction of your lone vessel? He turned his reptilian gaze toward Valar. This is absurd. We should recall our forces immediately. Leave this so-called Aegis to its fate. When it is reduced to debris, we will know where humanity stands. But Valar did not answer. His focus remained on the ship, on its still, patient posture. In the void, it had not powered weapons, nor sent any follow-up transmissions. It merely hovered, waiting. And then, without warning, it moved. A single shift in position, and the ship was suddenly somewhere else. Not a slow, lumbering acceleration like a typical battleship, but an instantaneous relocation, as if reality itself had bent around it. The tactical officers in the chamber scrambled for explanations. It didn't accelerate. One of them murmured. It translated? Lurik's eyes flickered, his mind racing through calculations. No energy spike, no gravitational distortion, no tachyon wake. It is as if... He hesitated. As if it was never there in the first place. Valar's grip tightened on the console. This was no ordinary vessel. The Aegis drifted now at the outer perimeter of the system, precisely aligned with the incoming Cathari forces. It had placed itself between the enemy and Alaris Prime, a shield of blackened steel standing against an ocean of teeth and hunger, and still, it had not powered its weapons. The War Council's chamber buzzed with hurried debates, theories, and frustrations, but no one had an answer for what they had just seen. Then, as if fate itself had chosen, the moment for them, the alarms wailed. The Cathari had arrived. They surged into the system in numbers that defied comprehension. Thousands of bioships, their twisted, organic hulls pulsing with violet light, spreading across the void like a plague. The Coalition had faced these horrors before. They had fought, bled, and died against them. They had lost fleets, worlds, entire civilizations. And yet, standing alone, the Aegis did not move, did not flee, did not waver. The chamber filled with shouts, orders to mobilize. Fleets scrambled into formation, their battered vessels forming what meager defenses they could against the tide. But all eyes remained on the human ship, on the silent behemoth that had arrived with no explanation, no fleet, and no fear. Then, the ship spoke again. The voice of Commander Graves returned, calm and absolute, engaging. And with that single word, humanity entered the war. The moment the Cathari armada broke into the system, the cold void of space became a storm of chaotic motion. Their bioships surged forward, a ravenous tide of living nightmares, each vessel pulsating with an eerie, bioluminescent glow. They did not form disciplined battle lines like conventional fleets. They did not maneuver with strategy or hesitation. They simply advanced, mindless, overwhelming, driven by an instinct as old as the darkness itself. Consume, destroy, spread. The War Council aboard Alaris Prime's orbital station had seen this before. They had watched the Cathari descend upon other worlds, breaking through defenses like a flood bursting through shattered dams. They had seen fleets torn apart, cities swallowed in fire, entire civilizations screaming into the void before falling, silent forever. And now, once again, the tide came for them. But something was different this time. The Aegis did not retreat. It did not reposition or attempt evasive maneuvers. It waited. The War Council watched, transfixed, as the first wave of Cathari bioships closed in. Massive, grotesque constructs of bone-like plating and sinewy muscle, their hulls covered in writhing tendrils that sensed their prey. Their weapons were biological horrors, acid-drenched projectiles, tendrils tipped with spore-based explosives, and the most nightmarish of all, their boarding cysts, organic pods filled with clawed monstrosities bred to tear apart crew compartments from the inside. Valar gritted his teeth as he observed the swarm closing in on the lone human vessel. His officers were already muttering amongst themselves, exchanging theories, preparing for the inevitable. A single ship, no matter how advanced, could not hold against such an overwhelming force. Yet, as the Cathari closed the final distance, crossing into weapons range, the Aegis made its first move. No flashy energy buildup, no dramatic power surge, just an execution of pure, calculated destruction. From the heart of the ship, a pulse of light flared. But it wasn't a weapon, not in any conventional sense. The pulse expanded in a perfectly controlled wave, rippling outward in an invisible radius. And then, every single bioship within its path, hundreds of them, froze in place. Not physically halted, not ensnared by a tractor field or disabled by an EMP. They simply stopped responding. Their eerie glow flickered, their tendrils curled inward in sudden paralysis. The living ships, engineered to be fearsome engines of war, now drifted like corpses in the void. The council chamber erupted into chaos. "What is this?" Lurik's usually controlled voice carried an edge of disbelief. "No known energy signature. No weapons discharge. The Cathari just stopped." Valar said nothing. His eyes remained locked on the Aegis, watching, waiting. Then, the next phase of the slaughter began. The Aegis moved, not like any ship they had ever seen. Not the slow, deliberate thrust of standard warships. Not even the precision strikes of advanced skirmishers. The Aegis blinked. A flicker of displacement that sent it from one position to another in an instant. And wherever it appeared, Cathari, ships died. A single lance-thin beam of light erupted from its hull, silent, almost unremarkable. But the effect was immediate and devastating. Entire bioships imploded, not exploded, not shattered into debris, imploded. Their organic matter was compressed in a microsecond, crushed to the size of a grain of sand before vanishing entirely. Hundreds of them, thousands. Each time the Aegis fired, another part of the Cathari swarm simply ceased to exist. Admiral Valar felt the breath catch in his throat. This was not mere firepower. This was absolute precision. The Aegis did not fire wildly into the swarm. It did not rely on brute force. It dissected the enemy, as if its weapons had been crafted for the sole purpose of annihilating the Cathari down to a biological level. The War Council was no longer debating if the Aegis was enough. Now, they were wondering if it was too much. But, Even as awe and horror filled the chamber, Valar's mind remained focused. The battle was not over. The Cathari were a species of pure survival. They would adapt. They always did. As if responding to his thoughts, the second wave arrived. The Cathari hive mind did not rely on traditional tactics, but they had one overwhelming advantage: evolution in real time. The moment their front-line ships fell, the next wave surged forward, already shifting, already adjusting. Their bioships now emitted strange pulses, disruptive energy waves designed to counter whatever had disabled their predecessors. And this time, the Aegis did not stop them. Lurik inhaled, sharply, his primary and secondary hearts hammering in his chest. They're learning. The paralysis field won't work a second time. The Tarkin ambassador, who had been silent until now, let out a slow, measured breath. His reptilian eyes glowed with something that had not been there before: respect, and perhaps fear. Then let us see, he murmured, what else this ship can do. The Cathari launched their counterattack with savage precision. This time, they struck first. Bioplasma lances surged across the void, the energy so corrosive it could burn through hull plating in seconds. Spore missiles detonated in bursts of toxic vapor, designed to eat away at synthetic materials and organic matter alike. Swarm fighters, each no larger than a standard escape pod, rushed forward, their razor-edged appendages ready to rip apart anything in their path. The Aegis did not evade. It did not raise traditional shields. It did not even seem to acknowledge the incoming barrage. And then, impact. The Cathari weapons struck the ship. For a heartbeat, the War Council dared to hope. Had they finally seen the limits of human technology? Had they found its weakness? But as the plasma fire faded, as the spore clouds dispersed, the Aegis remained. Untouched, not shielded, not armored. Just untouched. Valar's breath was slow, measured. The weapons had passed through it, as if it was never there. Then, before anyone could process what had happened, the Aegis retaliated. It did not fire a weapon. It unleashed something else entirely. For the first time, the Cathari hesitated. For the first time, their relentless hunger wavered. For the first time, they knew fear. And as the Aegis turned toward the heart of the enemy fleet, it became clear to all who watched. The humans had sent their most advanced ship, and it was more than enough. The moment the Cathari hesitated, the tide of battle shifted. It was a split-second pause, an almost imperceptible hesitation in their otherwise relentless advance. But it was there. To the War Council watching from Alaris Prime, it was like witnessing an unstoppable avalanche suddenly stutter mid-collapse. Valar leaned forward, his sharp gaze locked on the battlefield. His officers whispered among themselves, analyzing the footage, struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. Lurik's voice was a quiet murmur of disbelief. They felt something. Valar didn't respond. He was still watching the Aegis, the eye. Ship remained exactly where it had been, unmoving, unbothered, untouched. The Cathari weapons had passed through it like mist through empty space. No impact, no damage, not even the faintest sign that the ship had registered the attack. It was impossible. Even the most advanced shielding technology in the galaxy had limits. Energy could not simply ignore reality. And yet the Aegis had just done exactly that. For the first time, the Cathari did not charge blindly forward. They did not unleash another barrage. They did not continue their all-consuming swarm. Instead, they observed. And then, they adapted. A fresh wave of bioships emerged from the void. This time, their organic plating had already shifted, reshaping. At the cellular level, their surfaces rippling like liquid as they adjusted to a new form. Instead of energy weapons, the Cathari launched something different, something new. Spore tendrils, writhing like living filaments, stretched out from the nearest bioships. They did not fire projectiles. They did not use traditional plasma or explosive weaponry. They reached. A silent hum rippled through the void, as the tendrils slithered forward, extending toward the Aegis with eerie precision. They were not physical weapons. They were a frequency. Valar inhaled sharply. They're probing. Lurik's mandibles clicked together as his 4 fingers curled into fists. They don't understand what they're fighting. They're trying to comprehend it. The Aegis remained still, unbothered. But something was changing. A faint distortion shimmered around the ship's hull, a flickering ripple across the stars, as if space itself was bending in response. The Cathari weren't attacking the Aegis, they were communicating with it. A deep, unsettling vibration spread through the void. It wasn't sound, not in the traditional sense. It was pressure, a presence. The War Council's display screens flickered. Static crawled along their interfaces, distorting sensor readings, corrupting live battlefield feeds. And then, the whispering began. Not in words, not in voices, something deeper. A feeling, a suggestion, an alien pressure against the mind. It wasn't directed at the War Council. It wasn't directed at Alaris Prime. It was aimed at the Aegis. Valer's breath slowed. He had fought the Cathari. For years, he had watched them devour civilizations, dismantle fleets, reduce planets to barren husks. Never once had they hesitated. Never once had they stopped to understand their prey. Yet now, for the first time, they were trying to learn. What was the Aegis? The Cathari reached deeper, their living tendrils extending into realms beyond physical matter. Their bioships pulsed with the collective intelligence of their hive mind, expanding their thoughts, trying to comprehend. And then they made a mistake. They touched it. The Aegis moved. Not through space, not through thrusters or conventional displacement. It shifted. A ripple of absolute silence pulsed outward, an absence so complete that even the War Council's sensors failed to register it. And then, the first Cathari bioship imploded. No weapon had been fired, no energy discharge, no visible attack. It simply folded in on itself. A second bioship followed, then a third. A cascading effect rippled through the fleet. Bioships that had extended their tendrils toward the Aegis began vanishing. Not destroyed, not obliterated, erased. Lurik recoiled from his console. They're being unmade. Valar's jaw clenched. He understood now. The Aegis had never been just a warship. It was something else. Something beyond their understanding. Beyond even the Cathari's capacity to comprehend. The hive mind recoiled. The entire Cathari fleet shuddered. For the first time in recorded history, they did not advance. They fled. Not in an organized retreat, not with tactical withdrawal. They ran. Tens of thousands of bioships, each bred and designed for a single purpose, unrelenting consumption, turned their vast organic hulls away from the battle. They abandoned the fight. The Cathari hive mind had decided the Aegis was beyond them. This was not prey. This was not an enemy they could overpower. This was something else entirely. And so, for the first time in their existence, the Cathari chose survival over hunger. They burned their own crippled bioships, erasing all traces of their failures. They abandoned their forward bases. They collapsed their own tunnels and hyperlanes. Within minutes, the Cathari swarm was gone. Not defeated. Evacuated. The battlefield fell silent. The Aegis did not pursue. It did not fire a final shot. It remained where it was, drifting calmly, as if it had never moved at all. On the War Council's screens, the battlefield analysis systems struggled to compute what had just happened. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Gone, in less than an hour. Lurik exhaled slowly. His claws flexed against the edge of the console. Gods, he whispered. What have the humans created? Valar did not answer. He only stared at the Aegis, a single ship, and it had been enough. Silence stretched across the battlefield. It was not the silence of peace, nor of victory. It was something deeper, something unnatural, a silence that did not belong to this universe. The Cathari were gone, vanished. Their bioships, which had blackened the void only minutes ago, had scattered in retreat. Not beaten, not destroyed, simply removed. The Aegis remained. It hung in the void, undisturbed, unchallenged. To any observer, it was an unremarkable warship, if not for the impossibility of what it had just done. Velar exhaled, forcing himself to tear his gaze away from the ship. He turned toward his officers, expecting to see relief. Instead, he saw something else. Fear. Lurik's mandibles twitched as his claws gripped the console, as if holding on to something solid could prevent the creeping dread from swallowing him whole. They just ran, Lurik whispered. His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. The Cathari don't run. Velar's own mind refused to process it. He had spent decades fighting this enemy. He had watched entire sectors fall, entire fleets burn to nothing. And yet, they had not even fought back. They had fled. Velar turned toward the battlefield analysis screens, desperate for answers. His officers were already working, scanning every fragment of data, pulling every record, searching for an explanation. They found nothing. No energy discharge. No exotic weapon signatures. No known phenomenon that could account for what had happened. Nothing in any known archive could explain the Aegis. The ship had not fired. It had not deployed a countermeasure. It had not even moved, and yet the Cathari had abandoned the battlefield. Velar swallowed. "Contact the humans," he ordered. "Now!" Lurik hesitated. His claws twitched toward his console but did not press the command. Velar narrowed his gaze. That was not a request. Lurik exhaled sharply, tapping into the encrypted diplomatic channels. The War Council's link to the Terran Command Center opened. The screen flickered, struggling to establish a stable connection. A moment later, a human appeared. She was older, her dark skin lined with the marks of years spent in war rooms, her silvered hair tied back in a no-nonsense fashion. Her uniform bore no excessive decorations, only the insignia of her rank. Fleet Admiral Alara Voss Valer had met her once before, during one of the desperate alliances forged against the Cathari. She had been direct, strategic, a warrior, not a politician. Now she looked at him through the screen with an expression he could not quite decipher. "You saw," she said simply. Velar inhaled slowly. "I did." There was no bravado in her tone, no arrogance, no boasts, no explanations, just a statement of fact. The Aegis had stood alone, and it had been enough. Velar's mandibles clicked together. "What is that ship?" For the first time, something flickered across Voss's face. Not pride, not superiority, something colder. "Something we should never have built," she admitted. A quiet weight settled over the room. Lurik glanced toward Velar. His expression was wary, but his voice carried the question everyone was thinking. What did the Aegis do? Voss was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, she spoke. It defended itself. Velar felt an unnatural chill spread through his chest. "That doesn't answer the question." Voss exhaled. "Because I don't have an answer." Lurik's claws curled. "That's not possible. You built it." A shadow passed through Voss's gaze. "Did we?" Silence. Velar's thoughts churned. They had all seen it. The ship had done something. It had turned the tide of the war, in mere moments, but how? The Aegis had no visible weaponry beyond conventional human armaments. It had no exotic energy signatures, no gravitational distortions, no psionic emissions, and yet the Cathari had abandoned the war the moment they touched it. "Admiral," Velar said, his voice even. "What is that ship?" Voss studied him for a moment. Then slowly, she spoke. "The Aegis is the culmination of every war humanity has ever fought." She let the words sink in before continuing. "For centuries we adapted. We endured. We learned from every battle, every conflict, every enemy that tried to end us. We built warships, shields, weapons, but we were always fighting from behind, always outnumbered, always on the brink of extinction." Her expression darkened. "So, we stopped building weapons." Velar's breath slowed. "We built something that doesn't need them," Voss said quietly. A slow realization began to form in Velar's mind. Lurik whispered the words before Velar could. "It's alive." Voss did not confirm. She did not deny. Instead, she said, "It does what is necessary." The Cathari had tried to understand it, to connect with it. And in doing so, they had shown it what they were. Valar clenched his fists. "Admiral, what is the Aegis?" This time, Voss did not hesitate. "A mirror." The words settled heavily in the war room. Lurik's voice was hoarse. "A mirror of what?" Voss's expression was unreadable. "Whatever looks into it." The Cathari were predators. A civilization built on consumption, on hunger, on unrelenting instinct. They had seen themselves in the Aegis, and what they had seen was something so much worse than themselves. Valar's throat felt dry. He turned toward the battlefield, where the Aegis still floated, silent and motionless. It had not attacked. It had not pursued. It had only reflected. And the Cathari, one of the most terrifying forces in the known universe, had fled in terror. Lurik swallowed. Gods help us if it ever sees humanity. For the first time in his life, Valar had no answer. The Aegis remained, silent, motionless, watching. But there was something unnatural about that silence, something that pressed against the mind like a whispered warning in a dead city. Valar felt it, even through the vastness of space, even behind layers of shielding and the cold logic of tactical screens. It was looking at them, not with cameras, not with sensors, not in any way that technology should allow. Yet Valar could not shake the feeling that if he turned his head too quickly, he would catch something staring back at him from the darkness beyond the bridge's viewports. The Cathari had understood, and they had run. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Lurik, his claws curled so tightly against the console that the metal groaned under the pressure. His breathing was shallow, his eyes darting to the tactical screens. No movement, no anomalies, no changes. But he felt it too. Valar's voice was steady. When he spoke, "Admiral Voss, you need to tell me everything." She did not respond immediately. The silence stretched just a bit too long. Not from hesitation, not from uncertainty, as if she were listening to something else. Then, slowly, she exhaled. "I already have." Valar's mandibles twitched. "That's not an answer." Voss leaned forward, her gaze sharper now. "It's the only one I can give." Lurik's voice was quieter than before, but there was a sharpness to it. "Then give us something else. How is it built? How does it work?" Voss's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted. Just slightly. She did not want to answer. Valar saw it. He was not sure if Lurik did. He leaned in. "You said humanity built it. That can't be the whole truth." For a moment, Voss did not speak. Then, quietly, she said, "It wasn't built." The war room's air changed. Lurik stiffened. Valar felt the tension ripple through his crew. No one spoke, but the weight of that single statement settled like a leaden thing in their chests. Valar's voice was careful. "Then what is it?" Voss's gaze flickered. Not to him, but beyond him. For the briefest second, Valar had the wild, irrational thought that she was looking at the Aegis itself. When she spoke again, her words were deliberate. It was found. The silence that followed was different. It was not confusion, nor disbelief. It was something deeper, something primal. Lurik whispered, "Where?" Voss hesitated. Not in fear, not in uncertainty, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Valar forced his voice to remain steady. "Admiral." Her gaze met his again. And when she finally answered, her voice was quieter than before. "Earth." Lurik inhaled sharply. Valar felt his own mind struggling to process the implications, because that was impossible. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They had clawed their way into the stars through sheer stubbornness and ingenuity. They had not found long-lost technologies, had not stumbled upon ancient ruins of civilizations past. They had built their fleet from nothing. But if what Voss was saying was true, if the Aegis was not of human design, but something older, then everything they knew about human development was a lie. Valar's mind raced. "You're saying it was buried, hidden?" Voss shook her head. "No." The word sent a chill through him. Lurik's claws tapped against the console. Then how? Voss cut him off. It was waiting. The words struck Valar harder than he expected. Waiting. Not buried. Not abandoned. Waiting. Lurik's voice was strained. For what? Voss exhaled. For us. Valar took a slow, deliberate breath. Explain. Voss did not blink. We found it beneath the ice of Europa. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. A frozen wasteland. No known ruins, no ancient civilizations. A world that humanity had barely begun to explore before the wars drove their focus elsewhere. Valar clenched his fists. You're telling me that one of the most advanced warships ever fielded in galactic history was just sitting beneath a frozen moon in your own system? Yes. His throat tightened. That's impossible. Voss nodded. We thought so too. Lurik's voice was raw. Then how do you control it? We don't. The room went still. Valar's heart pounded. His mind rejected the answer, but he had heard the truth in her voice. He forced himself to ask, then why does it fight for you? Voss hesitated just long enough for it to be noticeable. Then she said, because we woke it up. Lurik whispered, and now it won't sleep again. Voss did not deny it. Valar inhaled sharply. His mandibles clicked together as his mind churned through the implications. The Aegis had not acted against the Cathari. It had not fired. It had not pursued. It had been seen, and in being seen, it had shown them something so terrible, that the Cathari, the apex predators of the void, had fled without a second thought. Something that had been sleeping beneath a frozen moon until humanity found it. And now, it was awake. Valar's claws tightened against his seat. He turned toward the battlefield screens, toward the Aegis, still unmoving in the void. His voice was low. What does it want? Voss did not answer, because she did not know. Or worse, because she did. The silence pressed in on Valar's chest, heavier than the gravity of his own homeworld. It was not the absence of sound. It was the weight of something unseen, something vast, something waiting. The Aegis remained still. Too still. No ship, no matter how advanced, should feel like this. It was not just an object in space. It was a presence, a thing that existed outside the boundaries of metal and circuitry. It had no engine glow, yet it moved. It had no heat signature, yet it existed. It had no communication signals, yet it had spoken to the Cathari without a word. And the Cathari had run. Valar did not know what frightened him more, what they had seen or the fact that he had not. His throat felt dry. Admiral, Voss did not turn her gaze from the Aegis. For the first time, Valar saw it. Not a soldier evaluating a battlefield, not a commander assessing a threat. She was listening. Not with her ears. Not with any human sense Valar could understand. But she was listening. It took her longer than it should have to respond. I don't know what it wants. Valar narrowed his eyes. That's a lie. Voss exhaled slowly, as if she had been expecting that. No. It's worse. Lurik's claws twitched against the console. Then tell us. Voss's lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, not from secrecy, but as if she was considering how much she could say before something noticed. Then, carefully, she spoke. When we found it beneath Europa, we thought it was a derelict, a relic, an artifact from something that came before us. Valar listened, his heartbeat steady, his mind racing. But when we got closer, she continued, we realized something was wrong. There was no decay, no corrosion, no damage. It was waiting. Lurik's breathing had gone shallow. You keep saying that. Waiting for what? Voss turned to face them. Her eyes were sharp, but behind them was something else. Not fear. Dread. When we stepped inside, it changed. Valar did not move. Lurik's claws dug into the metal of his console. Changed, not activated, not powered on. Changed. Voss's voice was quieter now. We thought we were the first to touch it. That it had been there for thousands of years. Millions. She exhaled. We were wrong. Valar felt something cold settle into his chest. Lurik spoke first, his voice a whisper. Then who touched it before you? Voss did not answer. Valar clenched his jaw. Admiral. She looked at him, and she said, No one. A silence deeper than the void stretched across the war room. No one. Because it had never been empty. Valar's throat tightened. Lurik whispered, Then who? The question isn't who, Voss said. The question is when. The lights in the war room flickered, a power surge. Minor. But Valar's mind snapped to one thought. The Aegis Lurik turned sharply toward his console, his hands already moving to scan for any interference. Voss didn't move. She was still listening. The flickering stopped. No anomalies. No systems compromised. Yet Valar could not shake the feeling that something had noticed. His voice was low. You're telling me that thing has been waiting for you? Specifically for humanity? Voss's lips parted. A breath that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. No. She turned toward the viewport, toward the Aegis. It was waiting for anyone. A chill ran through Valar's spine. Lurik whispered, Then why hasn't it moved? Voss finally looked away from the viewport. Her gaze met Valar's, and she said, Because we haven't given it a reason to. The weight of the words settled into his bones. Not permission, not orders. A reason. The Cathari had seen something that had sent their entire fleet running, but the Aegis had not chased them. It had not fired a single shot, because it did not need to. The simple act of revealing itself had been enough to drive them away. Valar exhaled, steadying his mind. His voice was calm. And if we did? Voss did not speak immediately. Then, finally, she said, Then we would find out what it really is. The war room was silent. No one wanted to know that answer. Valar turned toward the viewport again. The Aegis remained, waiting, just as it always had, just as it always would, until the day someone gave it a reason. And in that moment Valar knew. He never wanted to know what would happen if they did.